Good morning and welcome to the Susquehanna River Basin Commission's webinar focused on providing an overview of our Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant Program and a quick walkthrough of our online application. My name is John Balai and I'm the Manager of Planning and Operations here at the Commission. We're the program responsible for managing and administering this relatively new grant program. We're in year 4 in this cycle. I'm joined here today by Hillary Hollier and Pierre McCoy, key members of our grant team, as well as several members of our executive management team and other staff that are involved integrally in the grant program and managing grant projects. We'll kick things off with just a quick run through of logistics. I mentioned already we're recording the webinar, and I explained why primarily so that we can post it for others to review later for folks who weren't able to attend today. To keep the flow of our session and to eliminate distractions, we'd ask kindly that you mute all your lines for us, just so that we can keep moving through the material. The presentation, we estimate to run approximately 40 minutes. I'll cover the overview of the grant program, turn things over to Pierre McCoy to cover our application, and it should leave us 20 minutes or more for Q&A. In terms of questions and answers, we ask that you post those using the chat function, and you can do that at any time during the presentation. Hillary Hollier is here helping us out, queuing those questions up for us to answer in the Q&A portion of today's session. And in the event that we didn't get to answer all the questions, or there are additional follow-up questions that might come to mind after we cover today's material, this slide calls out an email account and a phone line that we have kind of dedicated specifically for this particular grant program that we monitor on a daily basis, and we'll be sure to get back to you with a response to any questions you may have that we didn't get to address during today's webinar. So to kick things off for us today, Andrew Dayhoff, our Executive Director, is here and has agreed to provide a brief welcome and some opening remarks.
Thanks, John. Good morning, everybody. Looks like robust participation. I appreciate everyone's interest. As John noted, we're kicking off the 4th year of our Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant, and we're inspired and excited to offer this grant opportunity again, largely due to the success of the previous 3 years. With the 64 projects that we awarded, we entered into a diverse group of interesting and innovative efforts. These efforts are achieving tangible results in building resilience and sustainability, and they're also offering benefits to our partners, both existing and new alike. You'll hear about a few tweaks to the program, but there's no change in that we're looking forward to another successful year of building partnerships and accruing knowledge of on-the-ground efforts that can prove most productive in achieving our shared resource management goals. So thanks again for your interest, and I hope you find today's session informative.
Great, thank you, Drew. Appreciate that. All right, so just to kick things off and give a kind of recital of the purpose of this grant program and why we launched it about 4 years ago, our aim was to attract and fund projects that help mitigate consumptive uses of water in the Susquehanna drainage or otherwise improve drought resilience. This has been a long-standing aim of our agency in its pursuit of implementing consumptive use mitigation projects back into the 70s. The grant program kind of put a new twist on things, and we've been excited about the opportunities it's created to leverage external ideas for projects, resources brought to the table by way of matching funds and partnerships, and accelerating implementation of on-the-ground mitigation projects in our watershed. In terms of eligible applicants, and this information is spelled out in our grant program guidelines listed on our website in more detail, but we will certainly hit the highlights here today. Eligible applicants include project sponsors, and what we mean by that are projects that we regulate or have approvals through our agency, government entities, nonprofits, and NGOs, and then academicians. In certainly, if you're an ineligible applicant, say a consultant, you could certainly partner with a regulated project or any of these other eligible applicants and in partnership prepare an application and help implement a grant project. And certainly we've seen many projects submitted and implemented under that kind of approach. Turning to eligible project types, these are the 4 project categories that are eligible for funding under the grant program. I'll just cover them quickly because the subsequent slides will provide a brief example of each that we hope will illustrate or at least give an idea of the project type that's relevant to each. But the first is water supply alternatives. So think about projects that develop water supply for either use during drought periods or to offset consumptive uses during drought periods. The second is project operation alternatives. They're projects that either all the time or particularly during drought events alter their operations to lessen the impact of water use on, say, stream systems, or try to leverage use of storage in lieu of using surface water intakes, and other kind of drought response measures that are implemented to decrease the water use footprint during droughts. Demand modification alternatives is really dealing with, leaving the water supply end of things and focusing on the demand side of things. It's really our water conservation type projects fit in this category. This one we've been pretty excited about the strides we've been able to make in cooperation with many public water supplies in a variety of leak detection, leakage management, lessening water loss through this suite of alternatives. And the last is our environmental and water quality alternatives. They are broadest in scope. They include a variety of project types that are getting at, water quality improvements or other measures that may not directly affect consumptive use one-to-one, but result in more resilient systems that can be more sustainable or counted on to be more sustainable during drought events. So to provide an example of each, starting at the top with water supply, this is an actual live project we've successfully implemented in partnership with Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority. Bill Meyer Quarry, just south of us, immediately adjacent to the Susquehanna River. 3 years of testing, pump testing, a variety of investigations in the impoundment proper. We were able to strike a water supply agreement for 425 million gallons of water supply storage here in an inactive, flooded limestone quarry, which we have been pretty excited about as an example of a public-private partnership with Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority. In the project operations category, this is more of a hypothetical example. Imagine or for example, think of a public or private reservoir. Could be a state park lake, could be a public water supply reservoir in a series of reservoirs that are used as supply source, where operations of that impoundment could be tweaked or modified, perhaps to implement low flow augmentation releases during droughts, or provide a continuous conservation release acceptable to the Commission in accordance with our policies for low flow management, in which case we would, the downstream reach and the watershed benefiting downstream from a more natural flow regime restored through that project implementation. On the demand modification side, this is a project we have completed, at least in pilot, with, again, Lancaster County Solid Waste Management Authority, just south of us here in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, at their Susquehanna Resource Management Complex, where we were able to partner with actually an MIT startup and implement some technology that they have promoted to capture water that's lost through the evaporative process at in this case, industrial cooling. We're able to capture water that's of a high quality, reused at the facility, while at the same time, achieving plume abatement. So it definitely an example of a partnership project in the energy sector where we've been able to achieve some water savings in the water conservation category. And then last but not least, in our environmental and water quality alternative category, this is an example example project we were able to undertake with the Upper Susquehanna Coalition in New York State. It's a 100-acre property acquisition. The photo on the slide shows what that property looks like. Obviously, you can see it's wet in many locations. It's a 30-acre wetland and riparian buffer restoration, so it's actual physical restoration in addition to just the acquisition. When completed, the property will be dedicated as state land to New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So it's a good example of a multi-agency and conservation group partnership to preserve land and also do restoration, obviously resulting in increased drought resilience in this particular watershed. In terms of funding, and this is consistent from past years, we've cited a total express funding capacity of $4 to $6 million. We have been able to, in subsequent years, fund near the ceiling of that limit, even slightly over in the case of last year. We're anticipating individual project funding of $100,000 or more. That's just our attempt to try to signal a desire for larger, more impactful projects, although we certainly have funded projects at price tags much lower than that. A change to highlight this year is with respect to cash match. This year we're going with a flat 20% minimum cash match requirement for all applicants. If you recall, last year we had a two-tiered minimum cash match that was predicated on the amount of grant funding requested. This year it's just a flat 20% match. And as in the previous 3 years, the grant period of performance, we're expecting to be in the 3-year window. Although in limited circumstances where justified, we have been able to issue no-cost extensions and so forth to complete projects. We recognize some of the challenges in lining up contractors and getting construction work permitted and executed. In terms of application reviews and how we approach those, we do those all in-house. The first phase is basically an eligibility administrative review where we're seeing if the applicant's eligible under the grant, if the project type is eligible under the grant, and if the applicant has met the minimum cash match requirement. All the application forms are submitted. It's signed, attestations are complete, and so forth. Once projects make it through the administrative review phase, they're forwarded on for technical review by a committee of 8 internally, representing a good cross-section of different programs and years of experience here at our agency. Those applications are if they're administratively complete, they're reviewed and scored based on criteria spelled out in our grant guidelines. And in our grant guidelines, one of the final sections is evaluation criteria, and we spell out those criteria. We spell out some of the questions that we ask ourselves to think about as we're reviewing applications, and they even cite the point allocations for each of those criteria. We've played this straight head on. We've basically extracted that criteria, created score sheets, and that's what we're using to evaluate projects. Some of the things, a couple little wrinkles new this year. We have allocated some points right out of the gate to actually projects that have consumptive use approvals through our agency. So regulated consumptive use projects are afforded some scoring right out of the gate. So are our regulated consumptive use projects that comply with our mitigation requirement via the payment of consumptive use mitigation fees. So we have added those 2 new criteria into the mix this year. You can see those in the evaluation criteria section of our grant guidelines. And then there, obviously, the suite of criteria we've used in past years, like purpose, benefits of the project, obviously the scope and budget. Experience of the applicant, we want to make sure the project has a likely chance of being implemented. Whether that project is located in or would directly benefit a priority watershed, those are featured in the map on the right of this slide, and we have an upload of that map available on our webpage. We give points to consideration of climate change and how the project could help, with climate resilience, help environmental justice communities and even engage environmental justice communities and so forth. So I'm going to hit the highlights of our schedule, which is consistent with past years and also on our website. And I'll turn things over to Pierre McCoy to give you a quick look at our online grant application. So the window for the grant this year, as in past years, opened November 1 and closes January 31 of 2025 this year. Basically, after that application period closes at the end of January, we kick off that review process, starting with administrative reviews and then moving to technical reviews of all applications received that are administratively complete. We take 2 months to do that, and we can give our commissioners a quick preview of what we've received by way of applications and our initial thoughts on those at our March quarterly meeting. We can then announce awards, and we've been successful at announcing awards in the April timeframe of each year, and we hope to do so again this year. And that really puts us in a place where we can begin putting together the information, the budget for those projects, and the allocations required to support them for inclusion in our fiscal year budget, which is adopted by our commissioners in June and becomes effective July 1. Once that's done, we basically have the money allocated and we can begin executing grant agreements with successful grantees. We can do that as soon as July, but depending on timing, the number of applications, how agile our grantees have been in turning things around with reviews from boards and so forth, it can go into August or even September, but we really can be ready to do that beginning in July. So that's a rundown of the schedule. Nothing really new there, but just to hit some of the highlights. So with that, I'll pass the baton over to Pierre, and he'll cover some of the highlights of our online application.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to do a quick look over of our technical Amplifund software that we use. This slide here on the left will show the links to apply for the grant. You can find that on our website. There's the link at the top. You'll notice also that our grant guidelines, our policy, and other documents and helpers are also listed there to link in. When you hit the apply for the grant button, you'll be taken to the first panel on your right, upper right there, which will describe the grant and allow you to actually apply by clicking on the button. Once that happens, you'll be taken to a series of different forms. If you've done this last year, nothing really has changed. We just tweaked a couple little places here and there. We've actually reduced it by 1 form, I believe. And then there's one more new section. That's what really I'm going to cover today. Is this year, instead of using an Excel-based budget, we're using the built-in Amplifund budget system. So I'm going to go over that. It's a little bit different. It should be easier, but I want to make sure there's no confusion. So this is the new Amplifund budget system. It's another form section that you'll have in your application. And what it'll do is it will set up tasks that you have to fill out. When you click the little plus, green plus there, it'll open up a new line item, at which point you want to line up with the scope of work that you described, I believe, in form number 4 or 5. Don't quote me on that. The biggest difference here is there are 3 different portions. It's a balanced budget, in other words, debit, credit, and total. So you have the expense budget, right, what you would spend. You have the revenue budget, which would be the grant funding or non-grant. Not grant funding is a cash match, and then total, so it balances out. You'll see on the right there, I highlighted the non-grant funded drop box. In order to enter your cash match for that line item, you will need to select that to yes. If you hit no, it will not give you the chance and it'll be 100% grant funded. It's up to you how you want to put your cash match. You can create a separate task for all your cash match, or you can add it to different tasks as you go. That's up to your discretion. Down at the bottom, notice that the narrative must be filled out. That's the little bubble there that says down at the very bottom. But make sure that lines up with your scope of work that you previously filled out during your application so it matches. That's probably one of the things that we have to remember, is that if they don't match, it's going to require us to kind of line them up and make sure that you are telling us exactly what you want, how you want it funded, and generally that they're in line. Detail this a little bit more. Like I said before, it's a 3-system budget. There's blue, green, and peach here. So you can see the blue at the top, expense, has to match the grant funding, even though there's different tasks. The green is non-grant funded. That's your cash match. Must also match down the bottom, non-grant funded. And the last, the peach, also needs to line up with the total budget over cost. If you just keep in mind that they all have to balance out to 0, you'll have no problem setting this up. Again, if there are any problems, we're here to help. We have a telephone line, we have an email. Drop us a line, we'll walk you through it if you have any problems whatsoever. Hopefully this should be a lot easier than last year. I know last year we had a more complex Excel-based, but this can be a little challenging as well, so don't be afraid to contact us. And then the last change we have also is the budget on our Amplifund website is a total budget for the project. As John mentioned before, our performance period is 3 years. However, we work in fiscal years, so we would like you to fill out an Excel sheet. On the right-hand side, you'll see it, that breaks down your budget for fiscal year. If you have any questions about that, again, feel free and contact us. Keep in mind, our fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. It is not January to December. So we might have some questions in case you fill it out a little differently. So overall, those are the only changes that we really made to the application. John mentioned before we tweaked around with the points and percentages for scoring. And then we also made a flat change from the cash match to a tiered match to a 20% flat match. Aside from that, everything should be the same. If you've applied before, it should look very familiar. We have the Amplifund team ready to answer any technical questions for logins and so forth, and we're here for any questions about the application. So I guess at this point, if there are any questions regarding either the program, the guidance document, the budget, or the software, please enter it in the chat and we'll answer it as they come in. John, I'll swing it back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Pierre. I saw some questions come through the chat. While we're compiling some of those, I'm remiss I wanted to mention a few other things that, 2 other things in particular, during my portion of coverage that I think might be worthwhile to consider and give some more space for folks to continue to think about and pose their questions. So on this funding slide, I wanted to call out, and it's important to note because it's kind of unique, that our grant funds are non-federal, non-state. So, basically that means that federal and or state funds can be used as cash match towards our grant program, which is a question that's come up a number of times in the past, and we wanted to lay that out there right out of the gate. The other point I wanted to make that I had failed to recall was that our default method of funding for the grant program is reimbursement of funds. And in limited cases, applicants can present their justification for requiring advance funds, and we would consider that. In the past, we really allowed applicants to select one or the other, and we've had some confusion surrounding methods and so forth. And in fact, we've had advance funding grantees really operate in a reimbursement style arrangement. So, this year we're kind of, our default is for reimbursement of funds, but, certainly if a case can be made where advanced funds are absolutely necessary to move forward with the project, we'll entertain that justification and we can deal with those where necessary. We're going to hit the pause. We're going to hit the mute button here for a moment while we compile some questions. Please keep those coming, and we'll come back online here in a moment and begin kind of answering those as they come in. All right, so and we'll try to take as many of these questions as we can in replying, but certainly feel free to keep them coming, and recall that you certainly can follow up after the webinar as well. But one question right out of the gate is match must be cash, must be cash, not in kind. That's correct. The minimum cash match requirement is 20%. In-kind match can be considered as an extra, if you will, or certainly it could be viewed favorably by the review committee. But the kind of bottom line standard that needs to be met is 20% cash match brought to the table. Second question I see is, and I'm going to look to Jason Euler, our general counsel here to help with this one, is an association that owns, operates, and maintains a drinking water system an eligible applicant?
Yeah, I mean, owning a system in and of itself doesn't make you eligible. There are 4 categories of eligible applicants. If you meet any one of those, you would be eligible. So if you're a project sponsor, meaning you have a docket for your water system with the commission, then you would be eligible. Doesn't sound like you would be a local, state, or federal government entity, but if you're a tax-exempt nonprofit organization under 501c3, you could be eligible, or also institutions of higher education. So if you don't meet one of those 4, you would not be an eligible applicant.
The next one is, are applications only accepted if written by an engineering firm on behalf of the water system owner? We'll accept applications written by anyone, just so long as the applicant is eligible and the project type is eligible. Certainly, I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly. Certainly, the water system owner can submit the application itself without necessarily needing an engineering firm to do so on their behalf. But we have seen both scenarios. So the key thing is that the applicant's eligible and the project type is eligible. Could you please review the eligible project sponsor category again? I represent a private manufacturer. So let me click back a few slides to get to the one actually referenced. Yeah, the first eligible applicant type listed is project sponsor. That's kind of our term defined in regulation as basically a regulated project, a project with a docket or a permit through us, or otherwise an approval through us. So that's that.
Or grandfathering registration would also count for that category. And Jason had clarified that it also can include an entity with a grandfathered registration through us, a grandfathered certification through us. So if you fall into any of those subcategories under project sponsor, which again are spelled out more clearly in the grant guidelines, you would be eligible. Certainly if you have follow-up to that question, I'd encourage you to give us a call at our dedicated phone line or email. We can discuss that a little more specifically. Can an applicant submit more than one application to fund multiple projects? Yeah, we don't have anything prohibiting an applicant from submitting more than one application currently. We'll accept, again, applications. We'll determine if they're administratively complete and eligible, and then they'll go through the review process. If it's more than one application, they would be scored against the entire pool, just like
you know, just like if just one was received. How detailed do the task breakdowns need to be? We've aimed for conciseness in task description. Instead of, in year one, we had an extensive narrative that we felt was overly cumbersome on applicants as well as our review staff. So we certainly are aiming for conciseness, but we want enough detail such that our team of 8 reviewers can look at, the proposed work under that task, aligned with the estimated cost to complete it, and get a sense of, confidence in, in terms of what work is proposed to be done, and if the cost seems reasonable, reasonably commensurate with it. So, again, I'd aim for concise, but we think about trying to plead a case to a committee of 8 that your project is worthy of funding and demonstrating the work you plan to accomplish with the funding you're requesting. Can costs be incurred before grant is awarded or contract signed? The answer to that is no. The costs covered under the grant need to be incurred within the period of performance, which again, for us, could be as soon as July 1 of next year. So the grant doesn't really contemplate retroactively covering costs prior to the award of the award of a grant and execution of an agreement, and prior to the beginning of our period of performance.
What about the match, John?
Match is the same.
Yeah, match is the same. Right? Match.
Yeah, match has to be expended during the period of performance of the contract. So when you have a signed contract and you have a term, match needs to be expired during that time frame. So.
The next question, and it's one we've gotten before, our proposal was declined last year, but we received no feedback. How would you suggest we go about submitting an improved proposal? We have not to date undertaken an initiative to conduct, post grant award briefings or a rundown of maybe deficiencies or rationales for why projects hadn't scored favorably, and we've chosen not to do that for a number of reasons. We do try to encourage projects to resubmit where they may have not been successful in past years, because as we mentioned earlier, we're basically grading the pool of applicants each year against our criteria, and we're ranking them until we run out of money within our expressed allocation. And so one year, there may be a very, very competitive pool of applicants, and it'd be more difficult to score high enough to be awarded. And then the next year, maybe proposals aren't as strong, or an applicant comes back with a proposal and really takes a keen look at our evaluation criteria and beefs up its case for why they deserve more points in each of those allocation sections. They could increase their score quite dramatically. So while we haven't done after decision briefings to projects, we would suggest resubmitting, and we would suggest really taking a close look at those evaluation criteria and doing the best you can to make the case for why your project deserves all or the majority of the points that are set aside for each of the criteria in our grant guidelines. Can you review the grant match requirements again? Cash versus in-kind, et cetera. So just click again here. I'm going to go backwards.
While John's flipping through slides, I would just encourage everyone to look at the grant guidelines for match, both, the cash match. We have a pretty detailed section on what's eligible. So.
Yeah, we empathize with folks, that work in the grant domain and the amount of material you can try to have to sift through sometimes. We've attempted to streamline that a little bit, if you will, and even with our grant guidelines, while we feel like they're a summary, we have put grant program at a glance piece that's like the Cliff Notes up front. You can scan and get a flavor of the key components of our program in 1 or 2 pages, and this includes the match requirements. But I will answer the question. Our minimum cash match is 20%. Again, because we're bringing non-federal, non-state funds to the table, those cash match monies could be met with other state or federal funding. In-kind match is certainly encouraged and is considered. We don't have a minimum requirement that needs to be met. So that tends to lend itself to more favorable scores in evaluation criteria like partners, leveraged funds, additional resources brought to the table, those sorts of things. But really, the main match piece is hitting that 20% minimum cash match.
Just a reminder, could everyone be sure to hit mute? We are getting some cut in that is probably obscuring the answers.
All right, so the next question, you mentioned a project cost floor of $100,000. Is there a project cost ceiling? How many projects do you typically fund each cycle? Good question. Again, I mentioned that we expect an individual project funding request of $100,000 or more. It's not a floor. We've funded projects, in the tens of thousands, certainly in the past, and we would have no reason to believe we wouldn't continue to do that if they produce a competitive application. Is there a project cost ceiling? No, our grant program guidelines don't call out an individual cost ceiling. We have a total grant funding range expressed at $4 to $6 million. If an individual project, and we have had some that have come in near the upper range of our total grant funding range, they might get some more scrutiny from a review committee in terms of what they're proposing and that sort of thing. So that's something certainly to consider in terms of preparing your application, just how much of the cost you want to try to carve out in a request. We've also had projects that have come to us in kind of a phased manner where they've asked for a piece of what they'd like and they match it, and then they've come back in a subsequent year and maybe moved into a next phase, and that's not prohibited by any means. How many projects do you typically fund each cycle? I'm going to look to my friends here and colleagues and help them pick me up. I think year one we had 14.
Yeah, I'll add, on our website, which may be helpful, we have the past 3 years documented as far as the number of awards, the amount awarded, the type of project. So, it's been increasing each year, but the last 2 years it's been on the order of 20 to 30 projects. So, as John mentioned, we try and balance out, what the project's requesting with how it scores against our priorities and such. But, to have some indication of what past awardees' range have been, you can look at our website for the details.
Yeah, that's a great clarification, Andy. I think we did 14, 28, 30 some, but they are all listed on our webpage. There's a nice map. We have them organized by year class. There's a nice map that shows their spatial distribution, and there's a short narrative that describes each of those projects, including the amount of funding requested. So it's really been a good resource for applicants to consider and look at in almost testing whether their project would be I guess, one, eligible, but also maybe how favorably it might score, the cost range of applications, those sorts of things. So I'd encourage folks to definitely check that out. Is a sealed engineer's estimate required to be submitted to support the budget figures? No, we haven't required field professional engineer cost estimates. As Pierre mentioned, we have, through Amplifund, a project budget form, and then we ask for an additional upload that basically breaks the project costs out over our 3 fiscal years so that we can adequately budget for them. And then we use that information ultimately to craft the grant agreement, scope of work attachment, and budget attachment, which ultimately goes back out to successful grantees when we're attempting to execute a grant agreement. So, and a field engineer's estimate isn't required, but we do hope folks have kind of sharpened their pencils and put together a reasonable estimate that not only can we use to evaluate the project, but that we can use as a beginning place in developing a grant agreement.
I will also say, this is Pierre, when you get to the budget section, there is an option to upload at the final budget. So if there is an opinion or an RFP or whatnot, you can upload it there as well as a supporting document for your budget.
Next question is another good one. While I know brick and mortar projects are prioritized, would a project that funds the need to get to a brick and mortar project, for example, survey, design, permitting, be eligible? It's a great question. We do, under the program, prioritize implementation of projects, but if you look in our grant guidelines under eligible use of funds, you'll see that certainly to the extent survey, design, permitting is part of a process towards the implementation of project, it is eligible for funding. We haven't funded projects that have been just solely survey projects. We haven't funded projects that have been just solely design projects, but if they're part of the package that gets to an implementation, those are listed as eligible funds. And that's spelled out real clearly in the guidelines under eligible use of funds. Maybe I missed this. Does the funding cover design and construction? I guess perhaps that was answered in part in my previous response. Certainly we want to the extent we prioritize implementation, we want to pay for construction, but if design is part of the package towards that end or outcome, that's eligible as well. Are we doing okay here?
Yeah,
do you anticipate trying to spread the funding across different project types and or geographic regions, or will the projects that score the highest be the ones who receive awards regardless of location and or project type? We haven't to date prioritized funding by project type or geography. We've discussed those ideas, both those ideas, and that, that may be a focus of ours in the future, or elevated scoring for certain project types or say watersheds in the future. But to date, we have not decided to do that, and we evaluate projects against our scoring criteria regardless of the project type or its geographic location. I mentioned some things like if you're in an environmental justice area or the project directly benefits an environmental justice community and they're engaged, that would result in increased points. That's spelled out in our evaluation criteria section of our grant guidelines. If your project is located in or directly benefits one we've delineated as priority for consumptive use mitigation, that would result in increased score allocations. So those are things to consider. We mentioned increased points for our regulated consumptive use projects and ones that comply with our mitigation requirements by fee payments. So that would increase cost. But otherwise, we look at them all. If they're eligible, they get scored against the criteria, and again, we haven't weighted locations or project types. Several previous awards were public water supplier meter replacement projects with emphasis on better water accounting, reduced loss. Is there a target loss improvement number the Commission uses as a base for eligibility, i.e. 15% current unaccounted for water due to failing metering will be reduced to 5%. Could I, Andy, can you
Yeah.
for me? I'll get a drink of water.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so the commission does have a standard. 20% is sort of our threshold. So we look for projects to maintain unaccounted for water loss below that 20%. So, you know, that's in regulation. So to the extent that's the commission's standard, that's what we use. You know, that isn't the sole reason. You know, as John mentioned, we prioritize projects, you know, for a full range of the criteria that we have outlined in the guidelines. But certainly, you know, unaccounted for water loss, you know, I would, if you're looking at a project where that's the goal of it, you know, I would use that information to put into your application. So, but yeah, 20% is the standard.
You read my mind. The next question I was hoping Jason Euler, our counsel, could help with: would K through 12 public schools be eligible for funding under the grant?
Yes. Local, state, and federal government entities are eligible, including school districts. So public school district would be eligible.
All right. Do you anticipate being able to offer this grant program on an annual cycle moving forward? Is there dedicated funding for the program? We do at this point anticipate being able to make the grant program available on an annual basis. We've done, and I'm looking at Marcia Hutchison here, our Director of Administrative Finance, has done some work in projections and looking at sustainability of our funds and what we think we could allocate annually and have the program be sustainable. And we think we can sustain the program on an annual basis at the express funding level that we put in the grant program, again, $4 to $6 million, and that's our plan. And we have no reason to believe we wouldn't be able to do that for years to come as it stands right now. Did I hit that okay?
Yeah, and yes, there is dedicated funding.
Yes, there is dedicated funding for the program.
And just to jump ahead while John takes another breath, the question about, you know, we mentioned this is non-federal, non-state, and the question is, are these funds from EPA? And they are not. This is a fee-based fund that backs this grant program, so projects that pay a fee to mitigate their consumptive use. So it is not EPA funds.
Okay, thanks, Andy. That hit Rick's question. Do you award partial requests? In other words, if a request for $300,000 is made, is it possible that you would only award $200,000, or is it all or nothing? That's a great question. Again, typically our awards have been all or nothing, but we have, we have had precedent of making an award offer at a lower amount than the total requested. In this case, we reached out to the grantee. We expressed, that their project scored very favorably, and we thought the price tag was high. We were able to work with them to slightly modify their scope of work and budget request to get in at, basically what this question's asking, get in at a partial award, and we were able to move forward and fund them. So while the lion's share of our projects that we've awarded have been for the price tag that has been proposed, we have modified some and been able to award partial requests.
And while this has not happened to date, you could envision a scenario where there's certain elements of a request. One of the elements which we would deem to be ineligible, for funding, we would have the option to partially fund the eligible portions as opposed to disqualify the whole application. So again, that's not happened, but theoretically that also could be a scenario where it happens, that we would expect that, all but one in the 3 years we've done this have been funded at the requested amount.
Great, thank you, Jason. This one, I'm hoping I could get some help from Marcia on. I think it's a pretty straightforward one. As this is a reimbursement-styled grant, does the grant program want/expect to see submitted the cost-expense cost of the project in an approved or passed municipal budget? We're trying to make sure we get that one right. Do we want to see the submitted cost expense of the project in an approved municipal budget? I don't think that's...
No, that's not a requirement.
Yeah, just that maybe we should say what we'd like to see. So when you sign an agreement, there's a budget that's incorporated into the agreement. So that becomes a budget against which we judge expenses and whether, as long as they're eligible, provide the right documentation, they would be reimbursed. Is that accurate reflection there, Marcia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's maybe worth calling out another resource that we haven't talked about so far, but on our grant, on the Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant webpage, we have a link on the right-hand side to a template grant agreement. And that's certainly a key piece of this whole grant program that applicants should be familiar with. In reviewing it, you'll see reference to what's required legally under the agreement, but particular to this question, it references the scope of work and budget, and ultimately that's going to be what grantees are going to be expected to meet in what they do. So we have had some grant agreement execution dates postponed until applicants have gotten board approval to, and certain things like that to sign the agreement and so forth. But we haven't necessarily been, holding things up, waiting to get a municipal approved budget to move forward. Can an applicant submit more than one application? Certainly, yeah. That's possible, and folks are encouraged to do that. So I think, have somehow gotten through all the questions, and thank you for posing some real thoughtful ones. We're at 10:54. We certainly are happy to stay on till the 11 o'clock hour. And again, I'll remind folks certainly to submit additional questions by phone or email if we run out of time or something comes to mind after we conclude. We'll leave the line open here for a few more minutes. We'd encourage any other last minute questions. Feel free to fire away at the chat. We'll sit tight for a minute, go to mute, see what we get, and either answer those or wrap things up here in a moment. Thank you.
There you go.
All right, we're back. We did scroll to the contact info slide. If you go to our webpage, we have several call-outs for our Consumptive Use Mitigation Grant Program. You should see those right up front. A question came in: how do we determine if the proposed project associated with a SRBC regulated consumptive use project?
You would have a docket or a grandfather registration with us. If you have a series of clients or you're a consultant and you're not sure, you can go to on our website. We have, you can look up all our projects by name or location, geography through a map function. We call it the WAVE, Water Application and Approval Viewer. And that would have all of our approved projects in there, including grandfather registrations. So they would be, that would be an easy way to look up if you have anything with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, Amy, that water application and approval viewer WAVE would be a good tool to use if you're thinking you have a project and you're wondering if it could be associated with a regulated one. That's a good suggestion, Jason. Will this meeting be posted for review? I'd like to be able to share it with some of the communities I work with. Yes, we mentioned that it was recorded or is being recorded, and primarily that's to post it for viewing later, for viewing by folks unable to attend, or certainly you can share the link with others you think would benefit from the information. Absolutely.
And that'll be placed on the landing page with the other information, correct?
That's correct, yes. Okay, so we're at 10:58. I think we are caught up with questions. Again, use this information here to pose any additional ones after the webinar. Keep an eye out for the link to this webinar to appear on our webpage. And we look forward, or we thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing some applications from each and all of you in the coming months. So thanks again for your time, and have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thank you.